So, how does a regular person actually influence one of the most powerful governments on Earth? Well, in the US, the answer is actually baked right into the system, right from the very beginning. So, let's dive in and really unpack the unique ways Americans get involved and shape their own democracy. Okay, let's go way back. Over 180 years ago, a political philosopher named Alexis de Tocqueville noticed something simple, but really profound about Americans. He saw that people here didn't just sit around and wait for the government to do something. Nope, they were forming groups, associations, movements, you name it, to get things done themselves. And that instinct, it goes right to the core of how the country was founded. See, at its heart, the American system was designed to be a total break from the old way of doing things. It was set up as a republic, not a monarchy. And look, that's not just some technical term. It's a completely different way of thinking. Instead of a king and his subjects, you've got an elected president and citizens. That one distinction, it changes everything. It's this core idea that power comes from the people, flowing up, not trickling down from some ruler. And hey, this isn't just some vague philosophical fluff. It is literally written right there in the first three words of the US Constitution: we, the people. The whole document says, point blank, that the government's power, its very right to even exist, is given to it by the citizens. The politicians, they're supposed to work for the people, not the other way around. Okay, so how do the people actually use that power? Well, the most direct and, honestly, the most fundamental way is at the ballot box. Let's talk about how American elections are structured. There's this constant rhythm, to federal elections in the states. Every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is up for grabs, plus a third of the Senate. And then, of course, every 4 years, you've got the big one, the presidential election. What this means is there's this regular built-in opportunity for people to hold their leaders accountable and, maybe change the direction of the country. But, and this is a big but, here's the catch. Just because the opportunity is there doesn't mean everyone takes it. So in a presidential year, turnout is usually around 60%, which, by the way, is already lower than a lot of other developed countries. But check out what happens in the midterm elections. It plummets to just 40%. Think about that. That means the majority of eligible voters are just sitting it out during these really crucial elections that decide who controls Congress. So what gives? Why is the turnout so low? Well, the reasons are pretty complex. For some, it's the Electoral College. They feel like their vote doesn't matter, especially if they live in a state that always votes one way. For others, it's just a general dissatisfaction, a feeling that the whole political process is broken. But there are also real structural barriers, things like strict photo ID laws, and a really tricky practice known as gerrymandering. All right, let's stop and define that term for a second because it is absolutely crucial to understanding this. Gerrymandering is basically when the party in charge gets to redraw the voting maps. And what they do is they draw these weird, squiggly lines to create safe districts for themselves. They might cram all their opponent's voters into just a few districts or spread them out so thin they can never win. So here's the bottom line, the thing you really need to get. Gerrymandering completely flips democracy upside down. Instead of voters choosing their politicians, it allows politicians to choose their voters. And when that happens, a lot of elections become foregone conclusions before a single vote is even cast. And you can see why that would make a lot of people feel like, hey, why haven't bothered showing up? But look, voting for politicians isn't the only way to make your voice heard. People also have a couple of other really powerful tools in their toolkit for shaping policy: direct legislation and, of course, public protest. In a lot of states, citizens can actually take lawmaking into their own hands. It's through this really powerful tool called the ballot initiative. Basically, if you can get enough signatures on a petition, you can put a proposed law directly on the ballot for everyone to vote on. You get to completely bypass the politicians in the state capitol. And believe me, the impact can be huge. Just look at 2024. Voters in places like Alaska and Missouri used these initiatives to raise their state's minimum wage. And get this, in 7 other states, citizens voted to protect abortion rights right in their state constitutions. And in many cases, that was in direct opposition to what their own elected officials wanted. Okay, so what about demonstrations? Hitting the streets. Protests are a cherished right in America, for sure. But how effective are they? Well, it's kind of complicated. Think back to 2003. Huge crowds marched against the invasion of Iraq, but the war happened anyway. Or remember the Occupy movement? It definitely raised awareness about wealth inequality, but that inequality has only gotten worse. So it just goes to show you, protesting by itself isn't some magic bullet for changing policy overnight. But, and this is important, that does not mean they're pointless. Not at all. A sustained movement can be incredibly powerful in shifting public opinion over the long haul. Take the Black Lives Matter movement. Those protests absolutely convinced millions of people about the justice of their cause. And that huge shift in public opinion, it led to real policy changes in policing, things like bias training and body cameras. It even sparked major symbolic changes, like Mississippi finally removing the Confederate emblem from its state flag. I mean, that's a change that was pretty much unthinkable just a few years before. And all of this brings us right back to what de Tocqueville was talking about, that nation of joiners. Because beyond just protesting in the streets, Americans organize. They form groups to fight for their specific interests. And by doing that, they can amplify their influence way, way beyond what any single person could do on their own. We call these organizations interest groups, or sometimes you'll hear them called pressure groups. And their goal is pretty simple: get the government to pass policies that help their cause. And that cause could be anything: environmental protection, gun rights, foreign policy, you name it. So how do they do it? Well, one of the biggest tools in their toolbox is money. Financial contributions. Let's take AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby, as an example. In just the 2023-24 election cycle, its affiliates donated more than $43 million to political candidates. And you can bet that kind of money has an effect. As the historian Walter Hickson puts it, politicians are well aware that if they cross a powerful, well-funded interest grip like that, they could suddenly find themselves facing a multi-million-dollar campaign run against them. This creates this intense pressure on elected officials to fall in line with what major donors want. But of course, this isn't a one-sided thing. The entire political spectrum is full of these powerful interest groups. You know, on the progressive side, you've got groups like the NAACP and the ACLU fighting for civil rights and liberties. And on the conservative side, you have the National Rifle Association and Moms for Liberty, focused on things like gun rights and education. They all use the same playbook: organize, advocate, and use money to push their agenda. All right, so let's pull back for a second. We've looked at all the tools in the toolbox: voting, protesting, direct democracy, organizing into groups. But when you put it all together, what's the big picture? Just how much power does the average American citizen really have? And this, right here, is the central question. On the one hand, you have the promise of the American system, which is huge. The Constitution guarantees your right to vote, your right to assemble, your right to organize. But then there's the reality. And the reality is that using that power is a constant struggle against these big systemic problems. Things like low voter turnout, the way gerrymandering messes with the whole system, and let's be honest, the incredible influence of wealthy, super-organized special interests. And that leaves us with one final really crucial question to think about. In this nation of joiners, where everybody has the right to jump in, but not everybody has the same resources, who really holds the power? Is it the people, using their constitutional rights? Or is it the process itself, with all of its loopholes, its barriers, and its pressure points that can be, well, expertly manipulated? That right there is the big, ongoing debate at the very heart of American democracy.